Howdy, welcome. I don't know how to introduce these videos. I wanted to come in today and do what I'm hoping is going to be my first kind of proper YouTube video. Something I've been wanting to do for a while. I'm going to do a retrospect on projects after I'm done with them. I feel like this way maybe I'm not as constrained to record or be outside of my process, and I can really enjoy my hobby, but still be able to share this with you guys and kind of give you a little bit of insight on where the project comes from, the stages that it went through, my failures, my successes, and things hopefully you can learn to, you know, do things better for yourself. And maybe just you might find it interesting, and I hope at least somebody does. So we are coming off of Adepticon. It's been a couple weeks now. My main project that I had finished, one of my two I suppose, was Civil War for the Marvel Crisis Protocol Path of the Worthy. So this is the first year that they ran that, and we'll talk a little bit more about the competition later. It did go pretty well, and I was very, very happy with the results. But the piece itself, I think, came out pretty great too. And I just want to kind of take you guys through a couple different things. First thing being kind of where the project came from, why I chose to do this piece versus any other kind of duel, and some other ideas that I did have. Second thing being the building process, talk about some compositional things and the figures themselves and kind of how this all came to be physically. I've got some suggestions for books for you guys if you did want to kind of divulge or delve into that realm yourselves. And then the painting as well, talk about a little bit of color theory and my approach with a little bit of why this was just slightly different than what I've kind of been working towards, and how I applied that and where things went right and where things went wrong. So yeah, let's take a look at some things and hopefully you guys learn something and do all the YouTube, the like and subscribe and the stuff, and let's get into it. So getting into where the project came from, obviously inspired from the books themselves. Read Civil War way back in the day, released 2006, 2007, written by Mark Millar. It was like the big Marvel event of that year, obviously with Cap and Iron Man kind of going at it. And I did pull this out and reread it, and it's a pretty great read. Mark Millar, a bit toned down from his normal insanity. It was pretty fantastic. The art is phenomenal, so just like a ton of good referencing there. And there were two pieces in particular that I used for reference, being on the screen now. So this one's from the book, and it is kind of in the aftermath of what starts the whole thing. And I just kind of like the framing on this, and just the colors were like a good little reference just to kind of see what was, how shiny materials are, and you know, what kind of are these materials made out of, and kind of just getting some inspiration from that. But the main one that I kept going back to was this one, with kind of, this scene does happen in a way, but it's not as brutal as everybody being dead on the ground. And I did use actually the buildings in the background for inspiration from my background as well. I do wish that I had used more reference. It's something that I've gotten better at, but I'm still not perfect at using as much reference as I should. So if you take anything from this, use more reference. So, you know, a lot of you might know Civil War more from the Marvel movie, which came out in like 2016, so about a decade after the book had been released. But I had just rewatched all the MCU stuff not long ago, and I didn't feel like it was going to be super helpful, just because I wanted this to be based off the books, not off the movies. So I did not really use that. The models themselves are two different packs from Marvel Crisis Protocol. First one being Cap and the Human Torch. Cap himself sculpted by Joaquin Palacios, and then both these guys painted by Brendan Roy. And then the Iron Man pack being him and the Hulkbuster, who was sculpted by Dave Kidd, and again, studio model painted by Brendan Roy. So the cars and the light poles that you'll see in some of these earlier renditions, those are just from the starter set from Crisis Protocol. It's actually one car that I used and I cut up into pieces to get the two car effect, and just obviously painted them to be different. Now, as far as the why goes, I mean, obviously, like I said, it's something I grew up with, and I wanted to compete in the Crisis Protocol Path of the Worthy first year doing it, and I painted a few Crisis Protocol models. I've also been super addicted to Marvel Snap the last couple months, so to have an outlet to kind of get that out in the medium was pretty great. So I didn't want to do Spider-Man. I did want to do a Spider-Man duel, because Spider-Man's kind of like the best, right? Like, he's one of the best heroes ever written. He's got some of the best villains, like, so iconic. The Spider-Man model, the newer one from MCP, is super dynamic. It's a great choice. I just thought there might be a ton of them. And obviously that's one. And also Brashido, who I will post his down below, links to his socials down below. He did an amazing Spider-Man versus Green Goblin. So I want to do something a little different, and I thought maybe, again, the Civil War would be pretty different, because it wouldn't be just good versus evil. It's a little bit more of a moral question for you to kind of look into yourself and see, who do you really agree with? And I painted 2 Captain Americas before, and he's always been one of my favorite superheroes, so to be able to do one of my own is going to be awesome. And Iron Man, not always one of my favorites, but, very interesting with the armor to get it right. And again, when you're working with the superheroes, they're so iconic. You've seen them so many times. I didn't need them to be picture perfect. I wanted to do my own version of them, which is kind of nice, because it's the same as when you bring a new artist in to do a comic book, right? Like, I wanted to do my iteration of these characters. I didn't need them to be so picture perfect. And I did make a couple choices, again, based on references. But, So, moving into kind of the composition stuff, there's 2 books that we're going to talk a little bit about. The first one being Art of Chris Suhre. This just came out pretty recently. If you're unfamiliar with Chris's work, he does incredibly beautiful storytelling. I'd say some of the best in the medium. And this book talks a lot about composition. And there's one composition in particular that we're going to look at, and why I chose to do this, and why you see it in almost every duel. If you look at Golden Demon or anything really, you'll see that kind of similar through line. And the second one is Picture This, How Pictures Work, from Molly Bang. And this was suggested to me from my friend Bob. And it's a really simple breakdown on how pictures work and why we kind of perceive things that are jagged in a certain way, or that a certain color reads with so much weight, or and it's a really, really digestible book. And that one is definitely one if you're getting into art. It's a really quick read. It's something great to have on the shelf. So definitely suggest that one. And if you're getting kind of deeper into miniature painting and art, Chris Suhre's is a really fantastic read to be able to get some insight in how he's done his projects. But let's take a closer look at Civil War itself. Now, I want to start with Molly Bang's book here in a little excerpt, and you can pause and read this, but I just want to focus on the 3rd paragraph. It says, "It means that any picture that emphasizes the diagonal, whether with shapes or colors or light or any structural elements, feels dynamic to us, because the diagonal implies movement or tension." Now, again, this is kind of what I was saying, where if you look at like any Golden Demon duel, any fight in most things, you look at any framing in film, you're going to have this diagonal. And you can see her picture here that kind of shows that with the arrows all moving. And definitely with the arrows, you get like a really good, just like actual movement. And then if you look here on Chris Suhre's piece, you can see he's got the diagonal drawn through it. And I didn't want to give too much of the book away, because I think if you guys are interested in his work, you should go and check it out. But you can see in this, which is another duel, that you've got a huge diagonal running through it that gives that tension, it gives that movement. And it definitely draws the eye that the big troll is about to put the beat down on the robot. So if you look at my initial mock-up, this is the very first one. We've already got that kind of set in there. Like, I knew that was going to be a thing. And I do want to just mention that, like, as I was going through this process and kind of flipping through the pictures here, I felt a little frustrated with myself that I didn't know this better, because I've read about it and I've seen a million pieces. And I think it's important to remember that, like, even if you research things, it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to, like, apply them and nail them immediately. And it's okay to, like, just completely fuck it up, or ask for help, or go into something and think that it looks right and then go get feedback and find out that it doesn't. So
You know, eventually, you know, the cars went down, and the main thing was I got feedback from Matt DiPietro. Has been my mentor for a very long time, and he had some great feedback for me about how to get a little bit more movement. And removing the light pole, just because, again, when you talk about compositional theory stuff, pointing lines are like a very either conducive or negative thing. So you don't want to point your viewer off the frame. You always want to keep them, always going to keep inviting them back into the scene. So again, as we kind of get down to the final composition here, in these final pictures, you can see that I tried to emphasize the diagonal with that little piece of rebar in the back. It's not much, but it helps. You know, you also kind of have this theory, especially in the West, because we start, you know, we read from left to right, so the frame normally starts on the left, and the car on the left drives you into the scene. The car on the right stops you from going away, and it pushes you back into the scene if you go there. And I knew I wanted to do the American flag, and it felt like a little on the nose, but superhero stuff is, you know, sometimes it's on the nose. So I knew I wanted to do the American flag, and Matt pointed out that it kind of created a nice triangle between the three of them. And the space between the cars also kind of put a little triangle. So, you know, kind of building in just more and more. It's, people say shapes, and I don't fully understand it myself yet, but, you know, creating shapes between objects and between the characters and between things in the scene and on the scene itself, between the background, between the foreground, and kind of the more complex, you know, obviously there's that line where things get too complex where they're unreadable, but we want to kind of push those things and you know, keep examining different things within the composition. So getting to kind of the priming stages here and getting onto the paint, and I am going to cut this video into 2 parts just because I think the paint deserves its own kind of time, and then in that one I'll kind of discuss the final bits with our how I got the titling on there, and kind of how that started and how that went, and then how the paint process went and how the competition itself went, and final feedback and some final thoughts for you guys. So that'll be it for part 1. I hope to see you for part 2.